It was a crisp autumn morning when Brandon arrived unannounced at my doorstep, his fiancée Melissa beaming beside him. The maple trees lining my street had just begun their annual transformation, painting the neighborhood in shades of amber and gold. At 65, I had grown accustomed to the peaceful rhythm of my life in the Victorian house my late husband Robert and I had lovingly restored decades ago. I'd spent that morning tending to my garden, planting tulip bulbs that wouldn't bloom until spring, a testament to my belief in tomorrow. The garden was in full autumn glory that day, ironic considering the storm that was about to break over our heads. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I welcomed them inside with genuine warmth. Brandon was my only son, and despite our occasionally strained relationship, I cherished every moment with him. He had inherited his father's height and my stubbornness, a combination that had served him well in his corporate career, but sometimes made our interactions challenging. Melissa was newer in my life, a stylish marketing executive with perfect hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They had met at a charity gala just 8 months prior, and their whirlwind romance had culminated in an engagement that had taken me by surprise. "Mom, you really should consider getting help with this place," Brandon remarked as he stepped through the entryway, eyeing the antique grandfather clock that had been in Robert's family for generations. "It's a lot for you to maintain on your own." "I manage just fine," I replied, leading them into the living room where sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the hand-knotted Persian rug Robert and I had saved for 3 years to purchase. Mrs. Abernathy's grandson helps with the heavier yard work, and I enjoy keeping busy. Brandon exchanged a glance with Melissa that I pretended not to notice. I served them tea in the royal Doulton china cups that had been a wedding gift from my mother, a small luxury I reserved for special occasions. "We've been looking at venues for the wedding," Brandon announced, accepting the cup without acknowledging its significance. "The Bellevue estate is perfect. It's where Melissa has always dreamed of getting married." I smiled politely, though something in his tone made me uneasy. "That sounds lovely. It's quite exclusive, isn't it?" Melissa nodded enthusiastically, setting her untouched tea aside. "It's absolutely gorgeous, with those ocean views and the historic ballroom. But it's expensive," Brandon finished for her. "Really expensive. Plus, we want to have a honeymoon in the Maldives, and with the down payment, we're saving for our dream house in Oak Ridge Heights." I set my teacup down, the delicate clink against the saucer masking the sudden heaviness in my heart. I'd heard about Oak Ridge Heights, an exclusive new development with starting prices that would make most people's eyes water. The kind of neighborhood where people hired landscapers and rarely knew their neighbors' names. "Mom," Brandon said, leaning forward, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd developed in recent years. The one he used when explaining anything from how to use a smartphone to why I should consider investing in cryptocurrency. "This house is way too big for just you now. You're rattling around in here all alone. It doesn't make sense." The house had 4 bedrooms, hardly a mansion, but it was true that I only actively used half the space. Still, every room held memories that sustained me through my quieter days. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I already knew. The conversation had been building to this point for months, with subtle hints about downsizing and freeing up equity. "We've looked at the market," Brandon said, his eyes lighting up with an enthusiasm that made my stomach clench. "Properties in this neighborhood are hot right now. This house could easily sell for $950,000, maybe more, with all the original woodwork and the lot size." His eyes gleamed with calculation as he continued. "You could move into that nice retirement community by the lake, the one with the activities and people your age, and we could use the rest to make our start together. Clearwater Shores." He was talking about Clearwater Shores, a place I'd visited once with my friend Eleanor when her mother moved there. The units were small and identical, with thin walls and rules about everything from what color curtains you could hang to when you could have visitors. Eleanor's mother had died there 6 months later, her spirit dimmed by the sterile surroundings and scheduled recreation. Brandon has been so stressed about the finances, Melissa interjected, placing a manicured hand on his arm. He wants everything to be perfect for our new life, and your help would mean the world to us. I looked at my son, this stranger who sat before me speaking about my home, the home where he had taken his first steps, where Robert had spent his final days, where I'd nurtured my garden through 20 seasons, as if it were nothing more than an ATM for his convenience. "No," I said quietly. "This house is not for sale." The warmth evaporated from the room instantly. Brandon's face flushed, first with surprise, then with a building anger I recognized from his childhood tantrums. "What do you mean, no?" he demanded. "You're being completely unreasonable. You don't need this house. It's selfish to keep it when it could help your only son start his life properly." "I believe I've helped you start your life many times over," I replied, thinking of the college tuition, the down payment on his first condo, the bailout when his investment scheme failed 3 years ago. "This house is my home, not an asset. To be liquidated." What followed was a tirade I never expected from my own child. Brandon's face contorted with anger as he listed all the sacrifices he claimed I owed him for, all the ways I had apparently failed him over the years, from missing a soccer game when I was working double shifts after his father's illness to not giving him the same opportunities as kids whose parents really cared about their future. Melissa sat silently throughout his outburst, occasionally nodding in agreement, her eyes coolly assessing the room as if mentally cataloging items for an estate sale. "After everything I've done for you," Brandon finally spat, "all I'm asking is that you do this one thing. Either you sell this house and help us start our lives, or don't expect to be part of our future. No wedding invitation, no grandchildren visits. Your choice." They left without finishing their tea, the ultimatum hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The front door slammed with such force that the crystal vase on the entryway table, another wedding gift, trembled precariously. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by 4 decades of memories, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor. The house felt different now, as if Brandon's demand had somehow altered its very foundation. Yet despite the hurt, despite the shock of my son's naked greed, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. Little did Brandon know, I had already made my decision about this house 3 weeks earlier, a decision that would shock him to his core when he finally discovered the truth. That evening, after Brandon and Melissa left, I walked through each room of my house, trailing my fingers along the familiar walls. Every corner held a memory, some joyful, some bittersweet, all precious. I paused in the kitchen, where the height markers tracking Brandon's growth still adorned the doorframe, pencil lines climbing steadily from age 3 to 16, when he'd proudly announced he was too old for that kid stuff. I remembered the day we'd moved in, Robert carrying me across the threshold despite the fact we'd already been married for 3 years. "New house, new tradition," he'd declared, his laugh echoing through the empty rooms that would soon become our sanctuary. We were just 25 then, barely more than children ourselves, taking on a fixer-upper that everyone said would ruin us. The house had been a disaster, peeling wallpaper, creaking floors, plumbing that worked only when it felt like it. But Robert had seen the bones of it, the potential beneath the neglect. "This house has character, Margaret," he'd insisted, "and so do we." For 2 years, we spent every free moment renovating, learning as we went, making mistakes and fixing them together. Robert became an expert at refinishing hardwood floors. I discovered a talent for detailed tile work. We argued over paint colors and light fixtures, but always made up before bed. Those were lean years. We ate a lot of pasta and postponed vacations. But we were building something together, something that would last. When I discovered I was pregnant with Brandon, we had just finished the nursery, a sunny yellow room that had previously been a dark storage space. Robert painted a mural of a whimsical forest on one wall, working late into the night to surprise me. I opened the door to that room now, Brandon's childhood bedroom that had later become Robert's home office and was now my sewing room. The mural was still there, though faded with time. I'd never had the heart to paint over it. In truth, this house had witnessed far more than just happy memories. It had seen us through Robert's diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, discovered too late. The downstairs guest room had become his sick room during those final months. Hospice workers came and went, teaching me how to administer morphine and change bedsheets with a person still in them. I'd slept on a cot beside his bed, wanting to be close enough to hear his breathing, to know he was still with me. Brandon was just finishing college then. He came home occasionally, but found excuses to keep his visits brief. The reality of his father's illness was too much for him, he said. He needed to focus on finals, on job interviews, on establishing his career. I understood, or tried to. Grief expresses itself differently in different people. Robert understood too, more generous in his forgiveness than I sometimes managed to be. "He'll regret it later," Robert had whispered one night when the pain was briefly managed and his mind clear. "Don't hold it against him, Maggie. Just be there when he's ready to face it." I tried to honor that wish after Robert died. I attended Brandon's graduation alone, clapping until my hands hurt when he received his diploma. I helped him move into his first apartment, assembling furniture and stocking his refrigerator without complaint. When he landed his first job, I took him shopping for proper suits, silently covering the cost when his eyes widened at the price tags. I did all this in Robert's memory, believing that someday Brandon would become the man his father had seen in him. I waited for him to mature, to develop empathy, to recognize the sacrifices we had made. I didn't consider it keeping score. I considered it investment in his character, in our relationship. But something had shifted in recent years. Brandon's career took off, and with it came a lifestyle focused on appearances and status. He moved to a luxury apartment downtown, bought an expensive car, took lavish vacations. The calls home became less frequent. The visits often rushed affairs centered around holidays or when he needed something. I told myself it was normal. He was building his own life, finding his way. Then came Melissa, with her carefully curated social media presence and her connections in the right circles. From the beginning, she seemed to view me as an obligation, rather than a potential family member. She complimented the house with faint praise, so vintage, so unique, and asked pointed questions about family heirlooms that made me uncomfortable. But she made Brandon happy, or at least he seemed happy, more animated and engaged than I'd seen him in years. I desperately wanted to believe that their relationship would bring out the best in him, would help him rediscover the values Robert and I had tried to instill. I wanted to believe that the materialism and status-seeking were just a phase, not a fundamental shift in his character. But their demand today had shattered those hopes. The son I had raised, the child Robert and I had poured our hearts into, was now a man who could look me in the eye and suggest I move into a sterile retirement community so he could have a more lavish wedding and a home in an exclusive neighborhood. Made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the back porch, settling into the wicker rocking chair that had been Robert's favorite spot. The garden stretched before me, orderly rows of vegetables transitioning to the wilder perennial beds where late autumn flowers still bloomed. Beyond the garden stood the old oak tree, its massive trunk a testament to decades of quiet growth. 3. Weeks ago, I had sat in this same spot, watching a different visitor walk those garden paths. Emma Parker, my neighbor's daughter, had grown up next door, often slipping through the gap in the fence to help me weed or harvest vegetables. Unlike Brandon, who had barely tolerated yard work, Emma had loved getting her hands dirty, asking endless questions about each plant and insect we encountered. After college, Emma had joined Doctors Without Borders, spending years in underserved communities around the world. When her mother Marie suffered a stroke last year, Emma had returned home to care for her, putting her own life on hold without complaint. She'd taken a position at the local community health clinic, working with patients who couldn't afford private health care. That day 3 weeks ago, Emma had come to thank me for the casseroles I'd been bringing over during Marie's recovery. We sat together on the porch, talking for hours, as we hadn't done since she was a teenager. She spoke of her work, her patients, her dreams of someday opening a free clinic in our town where healthcare could be accessible to everyone, regardless of income. "The problem is space," she had sighed. "Commercial rent is so expensive now, and medical facilities have specific requirements. I've been looking for 2 years, but everything affordable needs too much renovation for medical use." As she spoke, I found myself looking at the old carriage house at the back of my property, a solid brick building that Robert had used as a workshop. It had electricity, plumbing, even a small bathroom. It needed work, certainly, but the structure was sound. "Have you considered something like that?" I had asked, pointing to the carriage house. Emma's eyes had widened. "That would be perfect. The right size, detached for privacy but still accessible. I'd give anything for a space like that." The idea had taken root then, quiet but persistent. Over the following days, I'd consulted with a contractor about what would be needed to convert the carriage house into a small clinic. I'd researched zoning regulations and spoken with my lawyer about the possibilities. The solution had revealed itself with perfect clarity. I could transfer the entire property, house, carriage house, and land, to Emma's nonprofit organization, with provisions that allowed me to remain in the main house for the rest of my life. The carriage house would become her clinic, and eventually, after I was gone, the main house could expand the facility or provide housing for visiting medical staff. The paperwork had been signed just 3 days ago. The house that Brandon now demanded I sell for his wedding was no longer mine to sell. As I rocked gently in the evening air, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Robert would have approved. He had always believed in using what we had to help others in leaving the world better than we found it. The house we had poured our love into would continue to be filled with purpose and care. Brandon would be furious when he learned the truth. His rage would be a storm, destructive and loud. But storms pass, and what remains afterward speaks to what was built with care and what was merely for show. I took another sip of tea, watching the last light fade from the garden. Whatever came next, I was at peace with my decision. The legacy Robert and I had built would not be squandered on one extravagant day or a status symbol address. It would serve people who needed help, provide care for those often overlooked. That was a purpose worthy of our home, worthy of our love story, worthy of the life we had built together. And perhaps, someday, Brandon would understand that this was the greater inheritance, not money or property, but values that outlasted both. The following Sunday, I received a text message from Brandon. No apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior, just a terse note informing me that he and Melissa would be coming by that afternoon to continue our discussion. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Emma and invited her to join us for tea. "Are you sure?" she asked, concerned. "It sounds like it might get confrontational." "I'm certain," I replied. "It's time for everything to be out in the open." The hours, until their arrival, stretched endlessly. I busied myself with baking, an activity that had always calmed my nerves. By noon, the kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of almond scones, Brandon's favorite since childhood. Old habits die hard. Even now, preparing to stand my ground, I found myself making something to please him. Emma arrived first, carrying a bouquet of late chrysanthemums from her mother's garden. "For moral support," she said, hugging me tightly. I arranged the flowers in a crystal vase, one of the few wedding gifts that had survived 4 decades of life's inevitable accidents. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Brandon stood on the porch, Melissa slightly behind him. Both were dressed as if for a business meeting. He in a tailored suit, she in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. The formality of their appearance confirmed my suspicions. This was a negotiation to them, not a family conversation. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I've made tea." Brandon's eyes narrowed when he spotted Emma sitting in the living room. "I didn't realize you had company," he said, his tone suggesting an accusation. "Emma isn't company," I replied. "She's family. Please sit down." They remained standing, an obvious power play. Brandon cleared his throat. "Mom, we've given this situation a lot of thought. I realize I may have been abrupt in our last conversation." "Abrupt is an interesting choice of words," I noted, taking a seat beside Emma. "I would have gone with disrespectful, or perhaps cruel." Melissa's perfect smile tightened. "We're trying to be reasonable here, Margaret. There's no need for drama." I'd always asked her to call me Margaret instead of Mom, a boundary I'd established early in their relationship, but hearing my name in her mouth now felt like a deliberate attempt to establish distance, as if I were just another business associate to be managed. "There's no drama," I assured her. "Just clarity about what happened. Brandon demanded I sell my home to fund your wedding and threatened to cut me out of his life if I refused." "Those are facts, not emotions." Brandon sighed theatrically. "Look, Mom, you need to be practical. This house is sitting on nearly an acre of prime real estate. Do you have any idea what that's worth now? It's a waste for one person." "I'm well aware of my property's value," I replied calmly. "Then be reasonable," he pressed, finally taking a seat opposite me. Melissa remained standing, her slim fingers resting on his shoulder. "The Clearwater Shores retirement community has fantastic amenities. A pool, social activities, medical staff on call. You'd have less maintenance, more friends your own age." "Have friends?" I said, nodding toward Emma. "And I enjoy maintaining my home." Brandon leaned forward, adopting the expression he probably used when closing business deals. "I've taken the liberty of working up some numbers. If we sell for market value and you take a 2-bedroom unit at Clearwater, you'd still have a significant amount left over. You could travel, take up new hobbies, or contribute to my dream wedding and our new home," Melissa added, her voice honeyed but her eyes calculating. I took a deep breath, centering myself. "I'm not selling, Brandon. Not now, not next month, not ever." His face darkened. "Why are you being so difficult about this? Is it because of Dad? Because he would want you to move on, to help me build my future?" The casual invocation of Robert's wishes made something twist painfully inside me. Brandon had barely visited during his father's illness, had found every excuse to avoid the messy reality of death. Yet now he presumed to know what Robert would want. "Your father," I said carefully, "believed in building things that last, in creating a legacy of care and service. This house was part of that legacy." Brandon scoffed. "Legacy? It's a house. Mom, a collection of wood and plaster that's costing you a fortune to maintain. Be practical." "I am being practical," I replied. "More practical than you realize." I nodded to Emma, who reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "What's this?" Brandon demanded. "Are those property papers? Have you already listed with a realtor?" A momentary flash of hope crossed his face, quickly followed by suspicion when he saw Emma's calm smile. "Not exactly," I said. "Brandon, Melissa, I'd like to formally introduce you to Emma Parker. She's the executive director of Community Health Access Partners, a nonprofit organization providing healthcare to underserved populations in our county." "We've met before," Brandon said dismissively. "She used to live next door. What does this have to do with anything? 3 weeks ago, I continued, I transferred ownership of this property to Community Health Access Partners with a life estate provision that allows me to remain in the main house until my death. The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon's Dutch's guy face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a rapidly building rage. Melissa's perfectly composed facade cracked, her mouth falling open in an undignified gape. "You did what?" Brandon finally exploded, leaping to his feet. "That's not possible. You can't just give away property. This is my inheritance." "It was my property to dispose of as I wished," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "The carriage house is being converted into a community health clinic. After I'm gone, the main house will become part of the medical facility or housing for visiting medical staff." "This is insane," Melissa interjected. "You need to undo this immediately. Call your lawyer, tell them you weren't in your right mind." "I was of perfectly sound mind and body when I made this decision," I interrupted. "The transfer is complete and legally binding." Brandon paced furiously, his face flushed with anger. "You had no right. No right. This is family property." "It was my property," I corrected him. "Your father and I bought it, restored it, and paid for it. You haven't contributed a dime to its upkeep." "Because you never asked me to," he shouted. "You've always been so independent, so stubborn about doing everything yourself." "Would you have helped if I'd asked?" I questioned softly. The momentary hesitation before his "of course" told me everything I needed to know. "You can't do this," he insisted, shifting tactics. "I'll contest it. I'll sue. No judge would allow an elderly woman to just give away $1 million property on a whim." Emma spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. "The transfer was thoroughly reviewed by attorneys specializing in both real estate and nonprofit law. Margaret underwent a cognitive assessment before signing, specifically to prevent such challenges. The documentation is meticulous." "You," Brandon turned on her, pointing an accusatory finger. "You manipulated her. Took advantage of a lonely widow. That's enough." I stood up, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Emma did nothing of the sort. This was my idea, my decision, made after careful thought and consultation with professionals. I will not have you accuse her of manipulation when you're the one who tried to pressure me into selling my home for your benefit." Brandon stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. Perhaps the compliant, supportive mother he thought he knew had never really existed, or had simply reached her limit after years of one-sided giving. "Why?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "Why would you do this? Give everything to strangers instead of your own son?" "Emma isn't a stranger," I replied. "And the clinic will help hundreds, maybe thousands of people who need medical care they can't otherwise afford. That matters to me." "More than I matter to you?" His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, expecting me to fix everything. "You matter to me more than you will ever know," I said softly. "But that doesn't mean I exist solely to fund your lifestyle choices. I raised you to be independent, to make your own way in the world. I've helped you numerous times when you truly needed it. But this," I gestured around us, "this was never promised to you. This was my home with your father, and now it will be my legacy to the community we both loved." Melissa tugged at Brandon's arm. "This is a waste of time," she hissed. "She's made her choice. Let's go." Brandon shook her off, his eyes never leaving mine. "So that's it? You've made your decision, and to hell with what I want or need?" "What you want is not the same as what you need," I said gently. "You don't need a wedding that costs as much as a house. You don't need a property in Oak Ridge Heights. Those are wants, and expensive ones at that. You're a successful man with a good job. You can provide for yourself and Melissa without my house being sold." "This is not over," he warned, grabbing his coat. "I'll talk to lawyers. I'll fight this." "That's your choice," I said sadly. "But I hope you'll take some time to reflect first. Ask yourself why this house suddenly became so important to you only when you saw it as a source of money." Melissa was already at the door, clearly eager to escape the situation. Brandon followed her, pausing only to deliver one final blow. "Dad would be ashamed of you," he said coldly, "giving away what he worked for to people who didn't earn it." The door slammed behind them with such force that the stained glass panel in its center rattled precariously. In the sudden quiet, I sank back onto the couch, all the carefully maintained composure draining from me at once. Emma moved to sit beside me, taking my trembling hands in hers. "Are you okay?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd expected, yet the reality of Brandon's anger, his willingness to weaponize his father's memory, cut deeper than I'd prepared for. "He's wrong, you know," Emma said quietly. "About what Robert would think. I remember your husband. He gave my father tools when our garage was robbed, taught me how to fix my bike, brought soup when my mom had the flu. He would be proud of what you're doing with this place." "I know," I whispered. "But hearing Brandon say that—" "He's hurting and lashing out," Emma reasoned. "He thought he had something that was never actually his, and now he's grieving that loss. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but it might explain it." We sat in silence for a while, the shadows lengthening across the living room floor as afternoon faded toward evening. The house seemed to hold its breath around us, as if waiting to see what would happen next. "Do you regret it?" Emma finally asked. "The transfer?" I considered the question carefully, searching my heart for any trace of doubt or remorse. There was pain there, certainly. Pain at the rift with my son. Pain that he valued the house's monetary worth over its history and meaning. But regret? No. "I don't regret it," I said firmly. "This house was built on love and hard work. It deserves to continue serving a purpose greater than financing one lavish day or becoming a status symbol. Robert would understand that, even if Brandon doesn't. Not yet, anyway." Emma squeezed my hand. "He might come around, you know. Once the shock wears off. Once he sees the clinic in operation. The good it's doing." "Perhaps," I said, though I didn't entirely believe it. Brandon had shown me a side of himself today that I couldn't easily reconcile with the son I thought I knew. The sense of entitlement, the casual cruelty, the willingness to discard me if I didn't comply with his demands. These spoke to character traits that had likely been developing for years, unnoticed or ignored by a mother who didn't want to see them. As Emma helped me clear away the untouched tea and scones, I felt a peculiar mixture of sadness and liberation. The worst had happened. Brandon had made his ultimatum real, had walked away in anger. Yet I was still standing. The house was still standing. And soon, it would begin its new chapter as a place of healing and hope. Outside, the garden lay in evening shadow, the old oak tree a sentinel against the darkening sky. I would plant bulbs tomorrow, I decided. Daffodils and tulips that wouldn't bloom until spring. An act of faith in tomorrow, in renewal, in the possibility that even the coldest winters eventually yield to new growth. A week passed without any word from Brandon. I tried to carry on with my normal routines, volunteering at the library on Tuesdays, meeting my garden club on Thursdays, Sunday dinners with Marie and Emma, but his absence echoed through every day like a persistent shadow. I found myself pausing each time the phone rang, hoping it might be him, only to feel a small stab of disappointment when it wasn't. Emma and her team had begun preliminary work on the carriage house conversion. Architects came to take measurements, contractors evaluated the electrical system and plumbing, and a small committee from the nonprofit board visited to discuss the layout of examination rooms and reception areas. The activity brought new energy to the property, yet I couldn't fully embrace the excitement knowing that it had created this rift with my son. "You did the right thing," Marie assured me over coffee one morning. She had recovered remarkably well from her stroke, though she still walked with a slight limp. "That boy needed a reality check. He's been taking advantage of your generosity for years." "I keep wondering where I went wrong," I admitted, watching a pair of cardinals at the feeder outside my kitchen window. "Robert and I tried to raise him, with values, to appreciate what he had, to think of others, to find purpose beyond material success." Marie reached across the table to pat my hand. "You didn't go wrong, Margaret. Some children just don't absorb the lessons we try to teach them. And the world out there—" She gestured vaguely toward the window. "It rewards the wrong things sometimes. Success, appearance, status. It's a powerful influence." "I suppose," I sighed. "I just never imagined he would cut me out of his life over money." "Give him time," Marie counseled. "This is fresh. His pride is wounded. Men like Brandon don't handle disappointment well, especially when they've convinced themselves they're entitled to something." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. Marie had raised 3 children of her own, all of whom had turned out well. Emma the doctor, her brother Michael a high school teacher, and the youngest, David, a carpenter who had taken over his father's business. Perhaps she was right that Brandon just needed time to process his anger and disappointment. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Michelle, Brandon's ex-wife. We had remained cordial after their divorce 3 years, exchanging birthday cards and occasional text messages, but rarely spoke on the phone. "Margaret, I hope I'm not bothering you," she began, her voice hesitant. "Not at all," I assured her. "It's good to hear from you. How are things at the gallery?" Michelle managed a small art gallery downtown, a job she loved even though it didn't pay particularly well. "The gallery's fine. That's not why I'm calling." She paused. "I ran into Melissa yesterday at Nordstrom. She was venting to a friend about you. Rather loudly, actually. I don't think she saw me." My stomach tightened. "I see. I gathered that you're having some disagreement about your house. She seemed to think you had promised to sell it for their wedding and then backed out." "That's not what happened," I said carefully. "Brandon demanded really, that I sell my home and give them the proceeds. I declined." Michelle's laugh held no humor. "That sounds like Brandon, always looking for the easy path to what he wants?" She hesitated. "Margaret, there's something you should know. Something I probably should have told you years ago, but I wanted to respect your relationship with your son." "What is it?" I asked, a strange foreboding creeping over me. "Do you remember when Brandon and I were saving for our first house? How you offered to help with the down payment?" I did remember. I had given them $35,000, money I'd set aside from Robert's life insurance policy. It had been a significant amount for me, but I'd wanted them to start their married life without crushing debt. "Brandon told me then that it was only a small portion of what you'd promised him," Michelle continued, her voice tight with what sounded like old anger. "He said you had agreed to give us half the value of your house when you eventually sold it or passed away. He was furious that you were holding out on us." I felt the blood drain from my face. I never promised any such thing. The $35,000 was what I could afford to give, not a partial payment on some larger promise. "I thought it might be something like that," Michelle sighed. "Brandon has a way of rewriting history to suit his needs. When reality doesn't match what he wants, he convinces himself that someone has broken a promise or cheated him somehow." "Did he say anything else about me? About my house?" I asked, dreading the answer. "He told me that your house was his birthright, that his father had explicitly stated it would go to him. He used to talk about all the renovations we would do when we inherited it." When I suggested we should just focus on our own home, he accused me of not supporting his family legacy. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, Brandon had been operating under the assumption, one he had apparently created, himself, that my home would eventually be his to sell or live in as he chose. The conversation we'd had last week wasn't just about his wedding or his desire for a new house. It was about what he perceived as his rightful inheritance being given to someone else. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this," Michelle said, softly. But when I overheard Melissa today, something just clicked. It was the same pattern I'd seen during our marriage, this sense that the world owed him something, that he was being cheated when he didn't get what he wanted. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the faded checkered tablecloth Robert and I had bought our first year in the house. The fabric was worn thin in places, but I'd never been able to bring myself to replace it. Like so many things in my home, it carried memories that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Had I missed the signs of Brandon's entitlement all along? Had I been so eager to maintain a relationship with my only child that I'd overlooked his manipulations and self-serving narratives? The thought made my chest ache with a complex mixture of grief and guilt. I was still sitting there, lost in thought, when the doorbell rang. Assuming it was one of the contractors coming to ask about the carriage house, I answered without checking the peephole. Patricia Whitfield stood on my porch, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her expensive camel coat buttoned against the November chill. Brandon's mother-in-law-to-be, a woman I had met exactly twice at engagement celebrations. "Margaret," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Before I could respond, she swept past me into the foyer, her critical gaze taking in the vintage wallpaper and antique furniture. "My goodness," she remarked, "it's like stepping into a time capsule. Charming in its way." I closed the door, gathering my composure. "This is unexpected, Patricia. How can I help you?" "I think we both know why I'm here," she replied, removing her gloves with deliberate slowness. "My daughter is devastated. The venue has been booked, deposits paid, invitations ordered, all based on the understanding that you would be contributing substantially to their start in life." "That was never my understanding," I said firmly. "Brandon and Melissa made assumptions about my property that were incorrect." Patricia's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "Brandon tells a different story. He says you've always promised that this house would be his inheritance, only to give it away to some charity at the last minute. Rather spiteful, don't you think?" I took a deep breath, reminding myself that becoming defensive would only play into her narrative. "I never made such a promise. The house was mine to do with as I chose, and I chose to donate it to an organization that will use it to provide healthcare to people in need." "Yes, very noble," she said dismissively. "But surely family should come first. Melissa is absolutely heartbroken. She's dreamed of her perfect wedding since she was a little girl, and now it's all in jeopardy." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. Melissa was undoubtedly spoiled and materialistic, but she was also a product of her upbringing, just as Brandon was partly a product of mine. However, they're both adults, with good jobs. They can still have a lovely wedding within their means. Patricia's mask of politeness slipped slightly. "Within their means? Do you have any idea what a wedding costs these days? Or what it takes to purchase a home in a decent neighborhood? Brandon's position at the firm requires a certain lifestyle, a certain image. Then perhaps they should focus on building that lifestyle through their own efforts," I suggested, as Robert and I did. "Ah, yes, Robert." Patricia smiled thinly. "Brandon has shared some interesting insights about his father. How he struggled financially, how he never quite achieved the success he hoped for. Is that why you're being so difficult now? Some misguided attempt to force your son to follow his father's humble path?" The casual cruelty of her words, the dismissal of Robert's life and work, sent a wave of cold anger through me. This woman knew nothing of my husband, his integrity, his kindness, his commitment to building something of value rather than chasing status and wealth. My husband, I said carefully, was the most successful person I've ever known. Not because of his bank account, but because of the lives he touched, the community he helped build, and the example he set. If Brandon conveyed anything different to you, then he understood very little about his father. Patricia seemed taken aback by my response, perhaps having expected me to either crumble under her pressure or match her aggressive tone. Instead, I felt a strange calm settling over me, a certainty that I was standing precisely where I needed to be. Well, she huffed, clearly we have different definitions of success. Regardless, the fact remains that Melissa and Brandon are now in a difficult position. The Bellevue estate requires final payment in 2 weeks, and without your contribution, they'll lose their deposit and their date. I'm sorry to hear that, I repeated, but my decision regarding my home is final. Patricia studied me for a long moment, then opened her designer handbag and withdrew a checkbook. I'm prepared to make you an offer, she said. The carriage house alone must be worth at least $200,000 given the property values in this neighborhood. I'll write you a check right now if you'll reverse this ridiculous donation and sell the house to Brandon and Melissa at a family rate. I stared at the checkbook in her manicured hand, momentarily speechless. Did she truly believe that everything could be reduced to a transaction? That my principles, my commitment to Emma's clinic, my vision for the house's future, all of it could be bought off with a check? No, I said simply. The property has been legally transferred. The clinic plans are underway. And even if none of that were true, I wouldn't accept your offer. Everyone has a price, she insisted, pen poised over the checkbook. Just name yours. Not everyone, I corrected her. And certainly not for something that matters deeply to me. The property will become a clinic where people who can't afford private health care can receive treatment. No amount of money would make me change that decision. Patricia snapped her checkbook closed, her facade of friendliness completely gone now. You're making a powerful enemy, Margaret. My husband sits on the boards of half the charitable organizations in this city. One word from him, and your little clinic will find itself strangled by red tape and permit delays. The threat hung in the air between us, naked and ugly. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the world Brandon was marrying into, a world where money bought influence, where threats replaced discussion, where appearances mattered more than integrity. I think you should leave now, I said, moving toward the door. And you can tell your husband that if he attempts to interfere with a legally established medical clinic serving underprivileged communities, I have several friends at the Chronicle who would find that story fascinating. It was a bluff. I knew exactly one person at the local newspaper, an elderly man who wrote the gardening column. But Patricia didn't need to know that. Her eyes narrowed, calculating the risk, before she thrust her checkbook back into her handbag. This isn't over, she warned, echoing Brandon's parting words from the week before. My daughter will have her dream wedding and her dream home, with or without your help. After she left, I leaned against the closed door, my heart racing despite my outward calm. The confrontation had been unpleasant, but oddly clarifying. The pressure from Brandon wasn't just about his own expectations. It was about fitting into the world he had chosen, a world of Patricia Whitfields and gated communities and appearances above substance. I moved to the living room window, watching Patricia's luxury SUV pull away from the curb. My conversation with Michelle kept repeating in my mind. Brandon's conviction that the house was his birthright, the story he had constructed about promises that were never made. The revelation was painful, but necessary. The son I thought I knew, the child I had raised with such hope and love, had become someone I barely recognized. Or perhaps, more accurately, he had always been becoming this person, and I had simply refused to see it. Either way, the clarity was a gift, albeit a painful one. I knew now that my decision to donate the property hadn't created the rift with Brandon. It had merely exposed what was already there. That night, sleep evaded me. I tossed and turned, replaying conversations with Brandon over the years, searching for the moments when I might have inadvertently fed his sense of entitlement. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and made my way to the attic, a space I hadn't visited in years. The pull-down stairs creaked under my weight, protesting after long disuse. I switched on the single bare bulb that illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the forgotten treasures of our family life. Cardboard boxes labeled in Robert's precise handwriting stood in neat rows. Christmas decorations, Brandon's school projects, photo albums 1975-1985. Dust motes danced in the weak light as I made my way to a weathered cedar chest in the corner. The chest had been Robert's grandfather's, passed down through generations. Inside lay carefully preserved mementos from our early years. Love letters tied with faded ribbon, our wedding album, the tiny hospital bracelet from Brandon's birth. I lifted out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Robert's journal, kept sporadically throughout our marriage. I had never read it, honoring his privacy even after death, but tonight I felt compelled to seek his wisdom, his perspective on the son we had raised together. I settled on an old rocking chair. We'd banished to the attic when we redecorated the nursery for Brandon's arrival. Caramel-colored varnish flaked off the arms as I ran my fingers along the wood, remembering how Robert had painstakingly restored it when we first brought it home from a garage sale. I opened the journal at random, finding an entry from when Brandon was 8. October 12th, 1987. Brandon hit a home run in Little League today. His first. Margaret couldn't be there. She picked up an extra shift at the pharmacy to cover Thompson's medical leave, but I recorded it on the camcorder. B was disappointed she missed it, said it didn't count if Mom didn't see it. I reminded him that she works so hard for us, that missing one game doesn't mean she doesn't care. He seemed to understand, but I worry about this streak in him, this need for constant validation, for everything to revolve around his accomplishments. I turned the pages, finding another entry from Brandon's teenage years. March 3rd, 1994. Another argument with B about the car. He insists all the normal parents buy their kids cars for their 16th birthdays, says we're being unreasonable expecting him to earn half the money himself. M and I are standing firm. We believe in teaching him the value of work, of earning, what you want rather than having it handed to you. But it's hard. The look of resentment in his eyes cuts deep. He doesn't understand that we're trying to prepare him for life, not make it harder for him. Sometimes I wonder if we've been too strict, too focused on building character. The other parents at school seem to give their children everything without question. Are we out of touch? Or are we the only ones who see how damaging that approach can be in the long run? I continued reading, entry after entry chronicling Robert's thoughtful reflections on parenthood, his hopes and fears for Brandon, his commitment to raising a son with values and principles. With each page, I felt his presence more strongly, as if he sat beside me in the dusty attic, nodding in understanding at my current struggles. One entry particularly caught my eye, dated just a few months before his diagnosis. January 15th, 2002. B graduated from college today. Watching him accept his diploma, I felt such a mixture of pride and concern. Pride in his intelligence, his charisma, his ability to achieve goals he sets for himself. Concern about the values that seem to drive him. Status, appearance, material success above all else. He introduced us to his new friends after the ceremony, all from wealthy families, all focused on careers that promise money rather than meaning. When I asked him about his plans to teach, a dream he's had since high school, he laughed it off as idealistic nonsense, said he's been offered a position at Coleman and Walsh starting at $75K with bonuses. said he couldn't pass up that kind of opportunity to set himself up right. Margaret sees his practical side as strength. Maybe she's right. But I can't help feeling we've failed somewhere along the way if our son measures his worth entirely by his salary and status. What happened to the little boy who wanted to change the world, who cried over injured birds, who gave his allowance to the food bank after we took him to volunteer? Perhaps he'll find his way back to those values eventually. Perhaps the world will knock him around enough to remind him what truly matters. I hope so. In the meantime, I'll keep trying to show him through example that a life of purpose isn't measured in dollars or job titles. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal. Robert had seen it all, the worrying signs in Brandon's character, the gradual shift from a compassionate child to a status-conscious young man. It wasn't just my imagination or a mother's disappointment coloring my perception. My husband had shared the same concerns, had wrestled with the same questions about where we might have gone wrong. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the attic's chill seeping into my bones despite the mild night. How had Brandon developed this sense of entitlement, this conviction that the world, that I, owed him financial support well into adulthood? Robert and I had been careful not to spoil him, had taught him about hard work and earning his way. Yet somewhere along the line, those lessons had failed to take root. I placed the journal back in the cedar chest and continued my exploration, pulling out a photo album from Brandon's childhood. There he was at 5, proudly displaying a model airplane he and Robert had built together. At 7, covered in mud after helping me plant the vegetable garden. At 10, beaming beside the lemonade stand he'd set up to raise money for the local animal shelter. The evidence of the values we'd tried to instill was right there in these fading photographs. Service to others, enjoyment of simple pleasures, pride in work accomplished through his own efforts. When had that child disappeared? And how much responsibility did I bear for the man he had become? I remembered how devastated Brandon had been when Robert was diagnosed with cancer. He was 22, just starting his first job after college. The news had shattered his sense of security, his belief in a predictable future where everything would go according to plan. While I had thrown myself into caregiving, Brandon had retreated, physically and emotionally. His visits home became less frequent, his calls shorter. At the time, I had attributed it to the natural avoidance of young people confronted with mortality, with the messiness of illness. But perhaps there had been more to it. Perhaps watching his father, a man who had always embodied strength and stability, fade away had triggered something in Brandon. A determination to control his own destiny, to accumulate enough wealth and status that he would be insulated from life's unpredictability, from pain. In the months after Robert's death, Brandon had seemed to double down on his career ambitions. He'd worked longer hours, pursued aggressive investment strategies, begun socializing exclusively with colleagues who shared his focus on wealth accumulation. I had worried about him but told myself it was his way of grieving, of establishing himself in a world that suddenly seemed more precarious. Had I enabled this shift by failing to challenge it? By continuing to offer financial support when he stumbled in his early investment attempts? By praising his material successes while not asking about the deeper purpose of his life? A thick manila envelope caught my eye, tucked beneath a stack of Brandon's school yearbooks. I recognized it immediately, Robert's will and final instructions. The lawyer had provided copies to both Brandon and me after the funeral, but I hadn't looked at mine in years. All the necessary legal matters had been handled. There had been no reason to revisit the painful documentation of my husband's final wishes. Now, however, I felt compelled to open it, to see if there was something I had missed or forgotten that might explain Brandon's conviction that the house should be his. The legal language was dry and straightforward. Robert had left everything to me: the house, his modest retirement accounts, the small life insurance policy. There was a separate letter addressed to Brandon, which I had delivered, but never read. Had Robert made some promise in that letter that I was unaware of? At the back of the envelope, I found another sealed letter. This one addressed to me with the instruction, "To be opened if Margaret ever considers selling the house." My hands trembled as I broke the seal, carefully unfolding the pages covered, in Robert's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, you're considering selling our home. I don't know what circumstances have led to this decision. Perhaps you're downsizing for practical reasons. Perhaps financial needs have made it necessary. Perhaps you simply want to change. Whatever your reasons, I want you to know that I support your choice. The house is yours, fully and completely, to do with as you see fit. That said, I want to share some thoughts with you about this place we've made together. Remember the day we found it? The realtor thought we were crazy to even look at it. Two young people with limited funds taking on a money pit like this. But you saw what I saw. Not just what it was, but what it could become. Not just a structure, but a home where love and purpose could flourish. We poured ourselves into every inch of this place. Every repair, every improvement, every garden bed and paint color was a labor of love. And not just for ourselves. We always talked about how this house would serve others. Remember our dream of turning the carriage house into a community space someday? How we would open our garden for neighborhood gatherings? How we would create a place of welcome and warmth for anyone who needed it. If selling is the right choice for you now, then do it with a clear conscience. But if there's any way to honor those early dreams of service and community, I hope you'll consider it. Our home wasn't built on wealth or status or appearing successful to others. It was built on the belief that what we create should benefit more than just ourselves. Brandon may have opinions about what should happen to the house. He has expressed, to me on several occasions, his belief that it represents a significant financial asset that should eventually come to him. I've tried to guide him toward a broader understanding of legacy and value, but I'm not sure those lessons have taken hold. Remember that while we both want the best for our son, the best isn't always what he thinks he wants or needs. Whatever you decide, know that I trust your judgment completely. You have always had the clearer vision of what truly matters, of how to balance practical needs with deeper values. All my love, always. Robert, I pressed the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely now. Even from beyond the grave, Robert understood. He had anticipated this moment, had seen the potential conflict between Brandon's materialistic expectations and our deeper values. And he had, in his gentle way, given me permission to choose purpose over Brandon's demands. The sky outside the small attic window had begun to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the darkness with subtle gray. I had spent the entire night immersed in memories, in the historical context of our family dynamics, and I emerged with a clarity I hadn't possessed before. The problem wasn't that I had failed as a mother or that Brandon had been corrupted by outside influences. The reality was more complex. Brandon had always had this tendency toward entitlement, toward valuing status and material success above deeper principles. Robert and I had recognized it early and tried to counterbalance it with our teachings and example. Sometimes those efforts had taken root. More often, especially as he grew older, they had not. I carefully replaced the journals, photos, and letters in the cedar chest, keeping only Robert's final letter to me. As I descended the attic stairs and made my way to the kitchen to start coffee, I felt a strange peace settling over me. The historical context hadn't provided easy answers or quick solutions to the rift with my son, but it had confirmed that my decision to donate the property aligned perfectly with the values Robert and I had built our life around, values we had tried, however imperfectly, to pass on to Brandon. The house would serve the community. It would become a place of healing and hope for people who needed it. And if Brandon couldn't understand or accept that choice, the failing wasn't mine alone. We had each played our part in reaching this impasse, shaped by choices made over decades. Dawn broke fully over the garden. I watched a family of cardinals at the feeder, vibrant splashes of red against the bare November branches. Life continuing, adapting, finding nourishment even as seasons changed. Perhaps Brandon and I would find our way back to each other someday. Perhaps not. But I would go forward knowing that I had honored what mattered most, not just to me, but to the man who had helped build this home with love and purpose at its foundation. On a chilly Saturday morning in December, I stood in my kitchen mixing batter for cranberry orange muffins when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at 9 in the morning. Setting aside the wooden spoon, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and made my way to the front door. Through the frosted glass panels, I could make out a vaguely familiar silhouette. A woman, not Emma or Marie. When I opened the door, Michelle stood on my porch, her cheeks flushed from the cold, a hesitant smile on her face. "I hope it's not too early," she said. I was on my way to open the gallery and thought I'd stop by. "I've been thinking about our conversation." "Not at all," I replied, genuinely pleased to see her. "I'm just making muffins. Would you like to come in for coffee?" She nodded, following me into the warmth of the kitchen. The familiar scent of baking filled the air, a comforting backdrop to what I suspected would be a difficult conversation. Michelle removed her coat, draping it over a kitchen chair, and accepted the steaming mug I offered. "I bumped into Brandon yesterday," she said after taking a sip. "At the supermarket of all places. He looked rough." I tried to keep my expression neutral, though my heart clenched at the image. Rough how? Tired. Distracted. Not at all the polished executive he usually presents to the world. She stared into her coffee. He was buying frozen dinners and beer. Lots of beer. "I didn't know he shopped at the local market," I said, surprised. Brandon had always preferred the upscale grocery stores in the more affluent neighborhoods, even when it meant driving farther. He doesn't, normally. He said he's been staying at a friend's place in the area. Apparently, there's been some kind of issue with Melissa. Michelle hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this." "You don't have to," I assured her, though curiosity and concern were now thoroughly awakened. "It's not my business anymore." Michelle looked up, her eyes meeting mine directly. "That's the thing, Margaret. It is your business, because I think this pattern is repeating itself. The same pattern I saw in our marriage." I slid the muffin batter into the oven and set the timer before sitting down across from her. "What pattern?" "When things don't go exactly how Brandon plans, he spirals. He looks for someone to blame, then punishes them by withdrawing, by finding ways to make them feel guilty for his unhappiness." She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "With us, it started when I didn't get pregnant right away. He had this whole timeline in his head. Married at 26, first child by 28, house in the suburbs by 30. When the pregnancy didn't happen, he acted like I was deliberately sabotaging his life plan. I remembered that difficult period. Brandon had called me often, complaining about Michelle's unwillingness to prioritize starting a family, how her focus on her gallery career was selfish and short-sighted. I had tried to remain neutral, to suggest that perhaps they needed more time, or should consider seeing a specialist. But I'd never known the full extent of how he had treated her during that time. "He made me feel like a failure," Michelle continued, her voice wavering slightly. "Every month became this high-pressure nightmare, and when I finally suggested seeing a fertility specialist, he refused. Said there was nothing wrong with him, so the problem must be me." "Oh, Michelle," I murmured. "I had no idea. I wouldn't expect you to. Brandon is very careful about the face he presents to different people. With you, he was probably the dutiful son worried about starting a family. With his friends, he was the frustrated husband dealing with a defective wife." She gave a sad smile. With me, he was alternately cold and accusatory, then apologetic and loving, depending on where we were in the monthly cycle of disappointment. The timer dinged, startling us both. I removed the muffins from the oven, their sweet tart, aroma filling the kitchen. As I arranged them on a cooling rack, Michelle continued her story. When we finally got pregnant after 3 years of trying, I thought everything would change. He was ecstatic, making plans, buying baby furniture months before the due date. Then I miscarried at 11 weeks. I turned to her, shocked. "You were pregnant? I never knew." She nodded, pain flashing across her face. Brandon didn't want anyone to know. He said it would just invite unnecessary questions and sympathy, make people uncomfortable. But the truth was, he couldn't handle the loss. It didn't fit his life plan. "I'm so sorry," I said, sitting back down and reaching across to squeeze her hand. "That must have been incredibly difficult to go through without support." "It was," she acknowledged. But what was worse was how quickly Brandon made it about him. His disappointment, his loss, his need to move on without dwelling on it. 3 weeks after the miscarriage, he told me it was time to get over it and try again. I winced, imagining the callousness of those words to a woman still physically and emotionally recovering from such a loss. "That's when I first really saw it," Michelle said. "The pattern. If life didn't conform to his expectations, Brandon didn't adapt or accept. He became angry, resentful, and looked for someone to blame. When the miscarriage happened, he couldn't blame me directly. Even he recognized that would be too cruel. So instead, he blamed my work stress, my negative attitude, my unwillingness to think positive." She paused, taking a deep breath. "The final straw came when he learned he hadn't gotten a promotion he felt entitled to. He came home that night and announced that we needed to move, that the negative energy of our apartment was holding him back. When I pointed out that we'd just renewed our lease and couldn't afford to break it, he exploded. Said I never supported his ambitions, that I was the reason for all his setbacks." I placed a warm muffin on a plate and slid it toward her, processing this new information. The Brandon she described was both familiar and foreign to me. I recognized his inflexibility, his tendency to blame others, but I had never witnessed the extent of his emotional manipulation firsthand. "After the divorce," Michelle continued, picking small pieces off the muffin, "he told everyone that I had prioritized my career over having a family, that I was cold and unsupportive. His friends, our friends, believed him. Why wouldn't they? He's always been charming, convincing. The wounded party. And now you think the same pattern is happening with Melissa?" I asked. Michelle nodded. "From what little he said yesterday, and from what I overheard at Nordstrom, it sounds like the wedding has been postponed. Melissa's parents aren't willing to cover everything, and Brandon is furious that his perfect plans are derailed again. I never wanted to cause problems in their relationship," I said honestly. "I just couldn't sell my home for the reasons they wanted. Their relationship problems aren't your fault, Margaret. They're the natural consequence of Brandon's inability to adapt when reality doesn't match his expectations." She finished her coffee and set the mug down decisively. "I didn't come here to badmouth your son. I came because I think you need to. Understand that what's happening now, his cutting you off, his anger, it's a pattern he's repeated before. It's how he handles disappointment." As Michelle spoke, pieces began falling into place in my mind, incidents throughout Brandon's life that suddenly appeared in a new light. The time he had refused to speak to us for days after we couldn't afford the expensive summer camp his friends were attending. His decision to stop playing baseball when he didn't make the starting lineup. His transfer to a different college. When he didn't get the internship he wanted at his first choice. Each time, he had externalized the blame, found someone or something responsible for his disappointment rather than adapting his expectations or working harder toward his goals. Each time, Robert and I had tried to reason with him, to help him see other perspectives or find alternative paths. But the pattern had persisted into adulthood, becoming more sophisticated but no less problematic. "Why are you telling me this?" "Now?" I asked Michelle gently. "We've been divorced for years." She looked up, her expression earnest. "Because when Brandon told me what you'd done with the house, donating it to create a clinic, I saw something I'd never expected. Strength. The willingness to stake a clear moral position even at personal cost." She smiled slightly. "I admired it, frankly, and I thought you deserved to know that what's happening now isn't your fault. It's just Brandon being Brandon." We finished our coffee in thoughtful silence. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the garden with a delicate white layer that softened its winter bareness. Michelle's revelations had been difficult to hear but had provided valuable context for understanding my son's behavior. "What will you do now?" Michelle asked as she prepared to leave. "Keep living my life," I replied simply. "The clinic conversion begins in earnest after the new year. Emma and her team are excited about the possibilities. As for Brandon..." I sighed. "The door remains open if he ever wants to talk without ultimatums or demands. But I've accepted that may never happen." Michelle nodded, wrapping her scarf around her neck. "That's healthy. You know, after our divorce, I spent months hoping Brandon would realize how unfairly he'd treated me, that he'd apologize, and we could at least be friends. It never happened. Eventually, I had to accept that his narrative, where he was always right and others always failed him, was too important to his self-image. As I walked her to the door, she turned to me one last time. "There's something else you should know. Last month, before all this blew up, Brandon approached me about investing in a guaranteed return opportunity. Said it was too good to pass up, that I'd be foolish not to liquidate some of my portfolio for it." My stomach tightened. What kind of opportunity? He was vague on details. Something about cryptocurrency and a friend's startup. He was very insistent, called me several times, sent lengthy emails about missing out if I didn't act quickly. She raised an eyebrow. "Sound familiar?" It did. When Brandon was in his late 20s, he had persuaded Robert and me to invest in a friend's restaurant venture, $45,000, a significant portion of our retirement savings. The restaurant had failed within 18 months, taking our investment with it. Brandon had been furious at his friend, dismissive of our concerns about the lost money, and quick to point out that we should have done more due diligence before investing. "Did you invest?" I asked. "No," Michelle said firmly. "After our marriage, I promised myself I'd never let Brandon's certainty override my own judgment again. But it made me wonder if he might have been counting on money from you, from the house sale, to cover his own investment in whatever this scheme is." The possibility sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the December snow. Had Brandon's insistence on selling my house been partly motivated by his involvement in some risky investment? Was the lavish wedding and house in Oak Ridge Heights a cover story for a more immediate financial need? I thanked Michelle for her candor and watched her car disappear down the street, her taillights glowing red against the white landscape. Back in the kitchen, I wrapped the remaining muffins for Emma and Marie, my mind processing this new perspective on Brandon's behavior. The pattern was clear now. When life didn't conform to Brandon's expectations, he didn't adjust. He lashed out. He found someone to blame, someone who had failed him by not providing what he believed he deserved. In the past, it had been teachers who gave lower grades than he expected, coaches who didn't give him enough playing time, a wife who couldn't produce a child on his schedule. Now it was me, for not selling my home to fund his desires. Understanding the pattern didn't make his rejection less painful, but it did help me contextualize it. This wasn't about my failure as a mother or even about the house itself. It was about Brandon's fundamental inability to adapt when the world didn't bend to his will. That evening, I called Emma and asked her about the clinic's timeline. "We're hoping to start renovations in February," she said excitedly. The architectural plans are almost finalized, and we've secured additional grant funding for medical equipment. That's wonderful, I replied, genuine enthusiasm warming my voice. I was thinking, might it be helpful to host an open house? Let the neighbors see the plans, understand what services will be offered? That's a great idea, Emma agreed. Community buy-in will be important for the clinic's success. We could set up in your living room, display the architectural renderings, have some of our medical staff available to answer questions. We settled on a date in mid-January, and as I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. While I couldn't control Brandon's reactions or force him to understand my choices, I could continue building something meaningful from the home Robert and I had loved. The pattern in Brandon's life had been revealed to me with painful clarity. But recognizing a pattern also meant the possibility of breaking it, or at least of refusing to be defined by it myself. I would not spend the rest of my life feeling guilty for failing to fulfill my son's material expectations. Instead, I would focus on honoring the deeper values that had always guided Robert and me, trusting that in doing so, I was offering Brandon the most important inheritance of all, even if he couldn't yet see its worth. 6 months later, I stood in the garden watching as patients entered the newly renovated clinic for its grand opening. The carriage house had been transformed. Bright, welcoming, state-of-the-art medical facilities where once there had been only Robert's old tools and forgotten furniture. Brandon didn't come to the opening. I had sent an invitation, uncertain if he would even receive it at his new address. The only response was silence, a silence that had stretched between us since that autumn day when he had stormed out of my home. Yet standing there amid the blooming summer flowers, watching Emma greet the first patients with genuine compassion, I felt an unexpected peace. The house that had witnessed our family's happiest moments and deepest sorrows was now serving a greater purpose, bringing healing to those who needed it most. Mrs. Reynolds? A young woman approached hesitantly. I just wanted to thank you. My children and I haven't had health care in years. As she spoke, I glimpsed the true inheritance I had secured. Not wealth or property, but something far more valuable. A legacy of service that would outlive me. My son might never understand my choice, but watching this mother's grateful tears, I knew with complete certainty that I had made the right one. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.